Hello, I have the good fortune today to talk to a friend of mine, Norma Pawestri. She is one of the lecturers of Language Center. Is that right, Norma?
Yeah.
Language Center of Bina Nusantara University, or also known as Binus University, a very well-known university in Tangerang and Jakarta as well, yeah, Indonesia. So, Norma, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Okay,
How are
so
you doing?
I'm also good. I'm great actually today. Okay, so
Okay.
Norma, I'd
Good to
like to,
hear.
yeah. So I'd like to know more about where you teach because Pinus University is actually located
Mm,
in both Tangerang and also Jakarta. So do you teach
yeah.
in Jakarta or in Tangerang?
Both actually. So I kind of move between Jakarta and Tangerang, but they provide shelter. So yeah,
Ah,
not a big deal actually. So I teach in both Tangerang campus and Jakarta campus actually.
okay, and it's not too far, yeah, from
Yeah,
Tangerang to
not
Jakarta.
really too far actually.
Okay. So Norma, can you tell us more about your background and also what you teach probably at Pinus
Mm,
University?
okay, yeah. So I think as Mas Signa probably mentioned before, my name is Norma Pawestri. You can call me Norma or Norm, as many people do.
Norm?
Yeah.
Okay.
I am actually Mr. Ignas Junior. So let that give information to the viewer here about who is older and who is younger.
Hmm.
So we studied linguistics together at Naresuan University, right? Quite a long time ago, and I'm currently teaching many courses actually. So I'm teaching general English course. So I don't teach student from English major. I teach student from many different major. I teach English savvy, English in focus, English success, and some English for special purpose like English for business presentation and English for academic writing.
I see. So you mentioned about technology as well, because from what I know, I think Venus University is very well known for its scientific and
Yeah.
also technological innovation. Is that right? So
Mhm.
yeah, I can understand why you teach that kind of courses then. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, actually we learned from the same university, both
Mhm.
in bachelor's degree and also in master's degree, right, Norma?
Oh
So
yeah, I almost forgot to mention that we are also from the same university when we did our bachelor degree.
right.
Hey,
So, what brought you to linguistics? Because you mentioned about linguistics.
mhm.
What interests?
um,
Mhm.
I think I've I've always known since my very early age that I am more into language. I would say like I would study mathematics and then English and Indonesian language, and this language subject would always get a better score, I would say. So I've always known since my early days that I'm into language, so that's why I studied language and linguistics to be particular as my master degree. It's always been fascinating for me to learn how language can be explained in such um, sociology in psychology, and it's like a very broad subject actually.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Norma is actually another polyglot that I'm talking to
Really.
today. Yeah, because you can speak all not only English but also other languages as well. Yeah, like German and also Thai, I believe. Yeah, Norma.
I hope so. I kind of forget a little bit about German actually. What a shame.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't really get a chance to practice
Yes, because
for this recent year, so I think I might need to practice more.
yeah, because it takes implementation of using
Yeah,
that language. Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah.
did experience the same thing for
Hmm.
you know
Thai.
new languages. Yes, Thai especially. I
Yeah,
forgot many
I
words in
completely
it
forget Thai
because
too.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so Norma, today we're going to talk about a quite interesting topic about humor and language,
yeah.
the use of
Mm-hmm.
humor in language as well as
Mm-hmm.
social media as well. Yeah, Norma.
Yeah,
So. Uh, Well, actually, it's one of your research topics that
yeah.
that you have. published, yeah, in a journal.
Indeed.
And yeah, so my next question would be about the topic itself. What excites
Mhm,
your curiosity for studying humor in the first
mhm.
place, and what is humor in your opinion? And maybe why is it worth studying?
Well, I think when it comes to curiosity, okay, for studying humor, it's I guess it all started ever since I was such a little child. Like I remember I've always been fond of any kind of, TV sitcoms, situational comedy, or sketch and then stand-up comedy. I would read like comics and comedy movies. So but then I was just would watch that kind of comedy for like a coping mechanism, or as a sort of escapism, like that would something that will bring loud or put me in a better mood, right? So just that, but I didn't really know how to kind of intellectualize the process of the humor. Like I don't know, I just laugh and that's it. But then I kind of started to gain a little bit of perspective about that when I start studying linguistic. Like I started to look at it in a more scientific and maybe academic and comprehensive way. I would look at it as a very fascinating creative process and a very interesting linguistic phenomenon, because I mean this is an inherent human quality and it's easy to be found in our daily life, right? I mean everybody likes humor, everybody jokes every day. But then, what makes the statement funny? When we ask people about that, I don't think everybody can explain that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
that's interesting.
I do agree with that. You're saying that it's a inherent nature of human,
Yeah, yeah.
because yeah, I do think that it's peculiar to human. When we are born,
Mm-mm.
uh, babies are so, I don't know, they just get used to humor because you know they laugh since
Maybe like
early age.
physical humor, like facial expression and stuff like that, they would love, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Like when we tickle somebody, for example, even though
Mm-hmm.
it's not humor, but
Yeah.
they laugh at it. So,
Mm-hmm.
do you
Mm-hmm.
consider tickling as part of humor, just out of curiosity?
Pardon?
Tickling when we tickle somebody by
Okay.
touching their body. So,
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Maybe that would be more like neuroscientific things that people can explain. It's like I don't know, like something that you do in your neuro way system, and that causes this laughter. But um, humor itself, I think there are so many different description on it, and some scholar might state that humor is a situation where humans are suspended between two mental states, okay, the moral and mechanical behavior. And by the mechanical here, the scholar mean not a part of any culture or civilized aspect of mankind. So there is this conventional way, and then there is this cultured and civilized way. And when these moral and mechanical are getting mixed up, this create a comic effect in the mind of the spectator, right? So
I see.
yeah, so that's one theory. And then Freud, okay, he said that humor is actually a reaction against social control and a way for the individual to circumvent its own censor. So it's like when you as a human get restriction, and then you kind of uphold impinge the individual instinct of self-autonomy. And there is this other scholar who mentioned that jokes is the ability to think of one situation or idea in two incompatible reference or realm, and that way it will result into lauters. And the other scholar might mention that joke is a play on socially perceived form. So it's like um, a proposal of something that deviates from the common norms or the accepted norm. And that's why sometimes jokes can play a role in unifying people and either intensifying or removing social segregations. But in terms of tickling, I would say that would be more like
Physical thing.
neurological system, yeah, like physical, something that has to do with your neurotic system. Okay, but it causes laughter also. But I wouldn't say that's a humor, but maybe if it's something that has to do with the language or this kind of thing, or like, you know, physical humor, then maybe that would consider it as humor.
Okay, so we're limiting the notion of humor into
I think
verbal things.
physical and yeah, and verbal, physical and verbal. Verbal meaning the linguistic or the language.
I see.
Humor. Okay.
Okay, that's interesting. And
Mm.
I forgot where I got this, but um, if I'm not mistaken, from TED Talks or something, somebody
Mhm.
saying that uh, analyzing humor is like dissecting a frog, if I'm not mistaken. So,
Yeah,
the
I
the
think
more
I've
we,
heard that too. Yeah.
yeah, I think from I believe it's from YouTube, but I forgot whether it's TED
Mm-hmm.
Talks or something. So the
Mm-hmm.
more, according to that speaker or the writer, probably, uh, he or she said that the more we analyze humor, uh, the more the frog. So so
Nice.
so so we use a kind of analogy here. The
Mm-hmm.
frog is the humor itself. So the more we
Mm-hmm.
learn about it, the more it
It's not
becomes,
funny anymore.
yes, it becomes less
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. So actually, yeah, I think in my research also it was stated that there are, when it comes to, the study of humor, scholars would have two different opinion. Like, there is this scholar who would think that, simply, why would you study humor? It actually, destroy the humor itself. It wouldn't become funny anymore. Why don't you just enjoy the humor, basically? And then the other scholar would say, well, by studying humor, then we know how to create more humor, right? We know how to create more funniness and
True.
joy. So
Mhm.
that's I think scholar come up with two different opinion when it comes to humor, and I'm probably the kind of scholar who would agree with the second one because I studied humor anyway.
Right.
I personally doesn't find that, studying humor or dissecting humor would actually make that humor not funny anymore, because I would analyze the humor, I would still love, you know to the humor. Like, I would watch series or sitcoms like Friends, or many sitcoms, and yeah, I know this linguistic ambiguity that they use, okay, the kind of formulation that they use to create the humor, but I still love. Like, for
Right.
me myself, at least, I still love the humor.
So you still enjoy the humor things
Yeah, I still
in that
I
case.
still do enjoy the humor. So I don't know if it's only me, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just, I would agree with the second scholar probably.
Right, right.
And why is it important to study humor? I think, not to study humor, but why is it important, right? Um, I would say it's very important. Okay. Because there are so many things that we can, do, or that we can, achieve. Okay. I mean, people are typically approach uh, pleasure and avoid pain, right? That's natural, and that way your work becomes something valuable. And we know that many, business and company, they try to make, funny advertisement, funny TV program, and that create attentions and entertainment. Okay. And in terms of, psychological and physical, aspect of it, I mean, there are so many study that, show how useful humor, okay, for the health. Like, there is this study which mentioned that laughter actually, help with some problem with lungs, and it reduces stress. And there is this other study that indicate when you perceive humor, and when we create humor, there is this different many part of our brain, like frontal cortex or something that kind of works, okay, and it creates such a neural pathways. And it actually like an exercise for the brain, right? So I think that's why many people say that humorous people or funny people are, smart people.
Mhm.
I think
Right.
I've heard, yeah, right.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean, to be able to create humor, I think that's an indication of someone is smart. I mean, many people say that
mhm. Mhm.
because you
So
works. I mean, your brain works, right?
right. So it's actually a whole lot of combination of
Yeah,
many things,
yeah,
actually.
and um, I mean, every day we would see funny stories, funny TV program. Like, we would come across this humor and these varieties of humor, right? And these, varieties of humor are closely related to the social and cultural values of society as an entity. and it plays an important role in social cohesion. I would say the study of humor is therefore important in understanding social interactions. And in terms of the language, right? Humor is an inevitable aspect of human discourse, and it paves the way to learn vocabulary and syntax and semantic in the target language. So, I mean, if you think about it, it can also be a tools that we can utilize to study second language, in a more easy and fun way,
True,
right?
true. Because it,
And yeah, and when we see, like, for example, stand-up comedians, or like comedians in general, they would sometimes come up or bring about this taboo issue
mhm,
that are not openly discussed publicly, like racism, the gender issue and stuff like that. And humor has this ability to bring up that taboo or issue um, in a such light way, such easy way, such perceivable way, right? So it's easy to get people into discussion when it comes to humor. I mean, if you think about it, right?
right. So, yeah, the it actually includes a lot of disciplines like linguistics, as you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, language, and then
Yeah,
uh, neurology. How do you call it?
yeah,
Neurology, and
yeah.
also
Social,
social anthropology. So many
yeah.
things are
It's
actually.
yeah. That's why it's fascinating for me. It's really fascinating.
So it's like your focus when scrutinizing that topic was actually anthropo linguistics. Can we say that?
Um, it was more grammatical actually, because my study was more focused more on the ambiguity based humor. So I would look at the linguistic ambiguity more.
Right.
So yeah, it's more like grammatical study actually,
Mm.
which may be kind of boring. And yeah, but the thing is, I would see humor as very closely related to linguistic, not even very closely linked. That, like, it depends on linguistic, I would say,
Mm.
especially verbal, not verbal, yeah, linguistic humor. It really depends on linguistic ambiguity, and
Mm.
that's interesting. And it's enabled me to explain the humor that I've seen throughout these years, and I understand that. And how do people make that, right?
Well, well,
So,
mm. well, I kind of disagree with what you said,
mm-hmm.
using the term boring, because I don't think
Oh,
that
okay.
it's boring. Yeah, for people who
Mm-hmm.
like languages like us,
Mm-hmm.
probably it would
Mm-hmm.
be very interesting because we
Yeah,
can learn
the
many
nerd
stuff.
people like us probably.
Probably.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want me to show some example? Like,
Sure. Sure.
yeah. Okay. Can I share screen?
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you see what I have here?
Yes.
So, what do you think make it funny?
Which one? The left?
Let's go with the left one first.
Common sense. It's not so common when
Mm-hmm. So,
well the
yeah.
words are like contradictory and well the title itself I think it's quite eye-catching and a bit funny I believe because
Mm-hmm.
people tend to take it for granted the idea of
Mm-hmm.
common sense.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
when the author wrote that title, saying common sense is not so common, it means that there's something new
Mm-hmm.
there that makes
Mm-hmm.
people want to read it more.
Uh-huh.
And then,
What about the sentence that those chickens said?
mm, uh, can you tell me how to get to the other side of the road? You're already there, you fool. Yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah, I think it has some sort of ambiguity, I believe.
Yeah.
Can you tell
Oh,
me how
yeah. What about the right one?
the right one? Where do birds meet for coffee? And that's a brand, right? And that's
Yeah. Yeah.
coffee.
What about the next one? Why
Why
does
does
Dracula have
Dracula
no
have no
friends?
friends? Because he's a pain in the yeah. So
Yeah. Right.
yeah, I think they all have some sort of ambiguity. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So there is this scholars called Robert Lu, and he actually differentiate ambiguity based humor into several categories. Okay, so yeah, he divided, okay, the kind of ambiguity that can be used to create humor. Uh, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 probably, okay, and I'm going to show you probably some, okay. The first one, it's the lexical based joke or lexical ambiguity based joke. So this is the ambiguity that take place in one of the lexical item within the text. In most cases, the two different interpretation are possible due to the presence of polysemy or homonymy or homophone. For example, here, have you ever appeared as a witness in a suit before? Asked the judges. And well, of course, replied the young girl. Okay, will you please tell the jury what suit it was? And she said it was a pink suit. She quickly replied. So you see, this is funny because this ambiguity in this lexical ambiguity in the word suits, right? It has two different meaning.
Right.
So that's
So
lexical ambiguity.
so it's in the level of word itself.
Yeah, right.
Word that has different
Yeah,
meaning.
different meaning. It could be polysemy, homonym, or homophone. Okay, and then there is this kind of ambiguity based joke which he called syntactic ambiguity. For example, here, when I was a 9-year-old girl, I was left an orphan. Harriet said, and then Carrie said, "Oh yes, what did you do with it?"
Mm.
Okay, so here the ambiguity would be in the interpretation of "I was left an orphan," which is a syntactic element of the sentence. Like it's either you want to interpret it as predicative object or as simply an object, right?
Right. So it's like being entrusted with an orphan or
Yeah, you
becoming an
were
orphan.
an orphan. Yeah, right. And then the other type, I think the one that would be more familiar, we are also familiar with this, is the phonological ambiguity ratio. So this is the non-identical phonetic form that simultaneously serve and lead to different interpretation and generate distinct lexical item or distinct syntactic representation, right? For example, a man said, "I like to buy a pair of nylon stockings for my wife." And the clerk said, "Here?" And the man said, "No, she's at home." So you get the ambiguous part, right?
Yeah. In terms of the sound.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's here or she's here, right?
Yeah.
So it's phonological ambiguity based joke. And then there is this kind of ambiguity based joke which was called as orthographic jokes. This is basically the writing system. Like when you play on letters, but it's actually impossible to utter the sentence or to do it in a phonological way. So it's just like a switch between T and S or stuff like that. So it's play on the letter. So usually it's play of form and patterns in the writing mode of communication. Okay, and then deictic reference. Okay, so this is the ambiguity which derived from the anaphoric element, which can be understood differently depending on the context and the set of potential semantic reference. Okay, for example, a caller said, "Hello, maternity wards. I'd like to know whether Mrs. Jones, a patient of yours, has already delivered." Okay, delivering a baby, obviously, right? And then the receptionist said, "Is this her first baby?" And then the caller said, "No, it's her husband."
Wait. Why did the callers say it's her husband?
Because the caller is actually the husband, right?
Ah, I see. Okay. Okay. So
Okay,
it's
so
like
the husband called, okay, to the
the
maternity
reference of the
ward,
word.
yeah. So the deictic reference would be the word this here.
Okay.
Okay, so this would be the ambiguous element. It's either you're gonna interpret this in this way or that way, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's like the person or the thing that is being
Yeah.
referred to by
Yeah.
the
Right.
word. Yeah.
So yeah. And we also have Robert Lu here also have what he called as specific versus non-specific interpretation. So for example here in Los Angeles, a man is hit by a car every 5 minutes. And then the other speaker said, "Boy, I bet he's pretty beat up."
Right.
So yeah, so it's in the first line, a man means non-specific pedestrian, but in the second line of the joke, an alternative reading creates specific reading that leads the recipient to think about a single male human who is injured because he is constantly hit by a car. So it's whether you want to interpret it in a specific or non-specific way.
By getting it more literally, yeah.
Okay. And there is this type of joke which he called pragmatic ambiguity joke, where the pragmatic ambiguity in jokes occur when the interpretation of the ambiguous fragment is different for its pragmatic functions, although they actually are syntactically, lexically, and phonologically identical. Okay, so for example, here there is this. I think two farmers he said, and the one farmer said, "Hi Pete, what did you give your horse when he had the colic?" And then the other one said, "Terpentin." Okay, thanks, said the first farmer. And then 2 weeks later, they meet again. And then the first farmer said, "Did you tell me, Pete, that you gave your horse terpentin when he had colic?" And then Pete said, "Yes." "Well, I gave mine terpentin and he died. So did mine," said Pete.
Okay, so it involves context in this case.
Yeah, it involves context and the understanding of what that people actually means, right? So yeah, I mean, Pete did give terpentin to the horse, but he didn't quite understand that his friend mentioned, or his friend wanted to know about some remedy for the horse, right? So he just took it like literally, without even considering this pragmatic context of the questions. So
Right.
that's pragmatic ambiguity. And there is this other type of jokes which we call type of modality. So this is an ambiguity between the genetic or original or unmarked interpretation corresponding the probable intention, and epistemic or alternative or marked interpretation modality. So for example, a professor said, "You can't sleep in my class," and then the student said, "If you didn't talk so loud, I could."
Okay, so it's like the intention of the student
Yeah,
or the professor not to speak too loud.
yeah, right. So it's the modality. It was intended to be a sentence that prohibit the students, but the students take it as simply a question. "You can sleep
Yeah.
in my class," right? So yeah, it's the different take of the modality. Like when it's actually a question, but the person take it as, let's say, a statement, or when it's a statement, then the person take it as, let's say, imperative or whatever is that. So yeah, it's the type of modality. And then last one, okay, it's the tactual cohesions. Okay, so tactual cohesions is the ambiguity that arise from the presence versus absence of semantic ties. So the connection, semantic connection between the two elements of the joke text. Okay, for example, a man who has lost his turkey is caught by a policeman climbing in through the window, and invite the policeman in to prove it is really his home. Okay, so "This is my living room," he said, switching on the light boldly, and "This is my $6,000 Spanish living room switch," and so on, continuing through the whole house, including the bedroom. So where a man and a woman are discovered making love passionately on the bed. Okay, and "This is my carved French bedstead, and that's my wife," finished the man. "Now let's go downstairs and have some coffee." Okay, so they go downstairs, and as they are drinking the coffee, the policeman can't prevent himself from bursting out. And he asks, the man, "Well, what about the guy up in the bedroom on top of your wife?" And he said, "Oh, him," said the man, "to hell with him. Let him make his own coffee."
Yeah. So well, it's larger than probably
Yeah,
the largest one, yeah, compared to the
yeah,
previous
yeah.
uh
It's like
joke.
within a text, right?
Right. In terms of the coverage, it's the largest one. So
Yeah.
well, it's actually on many levels, from
Mm-hmm.
uh, phonological levels, sound level
Mm-hmm.
to text. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, there is this, yeah, like it's two ideas and you just come across it and they put it together.
Interesting.
Okay.
Interesting.
Okay, so yeah. So that's some example of, linguistic ambiguity based humor, and that's, interesting for me to look at. It's kind of a way to, let's say, dissect a humor.
Yeah. So it also actually helps me to realize that ambiguity is
Hmm, hmm.
actually quite a multifaceted word. I mean, it
Yeah,
has that level from sound to text, yeah,
to lexical, to
lexic,
syntactical, yeah.
even to pragmatic, to
Hmm,
contextual
hmm, hmm,
kind of jokes, yeah.
hmm, hmm.
Okay, but
Yeah.
talking about humor, jokes, I'm I have another question about this, yeah. So, do you think that humor and comedy, because I often hear the word comedy a lot, right?
Hmm, hmm.
So, do they refer to the same thing, humor and comedy? So, are you talking about comedy here, or is it
Oh,
humor?
okay. Okay, I think that's interesting. Well, I mean, if you try to look at, the word comedy itself, I think derived from I think Greek, right? I'm not quite sure, Latin or Greek, which mean, or which refer to literally or theatrical genre, if I'm not mistaken. So it refers to, like a genre of theatrical, which is funny, right? So there are two things, like tragedy and comedy. So I think humor is more like uh, a research to create comedy. So comedy is different from humor because, humor is whatever make us laugh in any situation. So, like you could see someone's, let's say, fall downs and you laugh, right?
Mm,
But comedy is a planned entertainment. Okay, so it's every word and action is chosen, and it has the ability to produce art. So um, we need humor to create comedy, but comedy is a play, an entertainment. it,
mm,
it is planned, right? But humor is anything that make you laugh in any situations.
right. So it's more down to earth term than
Hmm. Yeah,
humor,
so
yeah.
I think we don't say like stand-up humor, right? We have this
Mm,
term called stand-up comedy
okay.
because those stand-up comedians, they write, okay, they have this text, they practice, right? And then in like theatrical play or drama, I mean they they train, right?
Mm,
And they rehearse, so and they intentionally create, okay, this humor.
yeah.
Okay, but humor is like something, it could even be something impromptu or some as simple as you see your friend, doing something that you think funny, even though he or she doesn't think funny, but it's not planned. Okay, it's not
Mm,
it's not planned entertainment.
right. So uh, we're talking about daily. It probably includes telecommunication or even
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
professional kind of
Mm-hmm.
communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
While
Yeah.
comedy, it's more like a job than if you're
Yeah.
talking about the
Yeah.
thing that you mentioned. Oh,
And yeah, actually, it took a lot of effort and works, and hard, like we don't see this genre like humor movie, right? We know comedy movie
mhm,
or stand up humor. No, we don't say that. We say stand up comedy. It
right.
takes preparation and rehearsal, and it's plain entertainment basically. But humor, it could be as simple as you, okay, seeing me, let's say, fell down off the stairs or whatever is that.
Mhm,
But yeah, it's different.
right. Okay. So why did I ask that question? Because in yeah, like stand-up comedy, for example, that you
Hmm.
mentioned, they do have theoretical foundations to
Exactly.
construct their
Yeah.
humor. I
Yeah.
mean, stage humor, if
Hmm,
it's
hmm.
not, you know. So
And
yeah,
it took months of writings, right?
right, right. But
And creative process.
mhm, mhm. But here, from your study, you're focusing on the linguistic aspects of
Yeah.
humor, not only in or the one on stage, but also
Hmm.
the telecommunication
Yeah.
that includes humor. Yeah.
Hmm,
So it's
hmm.
more general
Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
case. All right. Okay, so Norma, in your view, do you perceive humor to be culture specific or universal? Because I think humor relates to the idea of culture as well.
Yeah, I would say so. I would think that humor is a universal phenomenon, but it is, culturally tinted or bounded, So, I mean, everybody knows humor, everybody has humor, but I think the way that we perceive humor is different from culture to culture. Okay, so I'm gonna give you an example. Like, um, okay, it could be in a way of our attitude towards humor. or it could be the resource for the humor itself, right? Like we know that for years, I mean, ever since the Greek time, I mean, Western culture would appreciate more humor. Like they would have, comedy play, and
Right.
I mean, even in the US, up to this day, they would have comedy pop and stuff like that. Like they appreciate humor, and they even use humor as a source of catharsis, as they
Mm.
say, probably. Like it's kind of stress release and coping mechanism, and it's an artistry, right? They appreciate humor ever since, like long time ago, I guess, right? Like a king would invite a comedian to perform and stuff like that. But in, let's say, some Asian culture, or I think in some Chinese culture, I heard that some dynasty, they would associate humor as, um how do I say, as something that is not noble. Like they would think of humor as a silly thing, not an important things, and something that is prone to lower class and stuff like that. And people would have different opinion or different attitude towards humor. Like they would consider funny people as someone who is not modest, for example,
Mm.
in some Eastern culture. And it so that's an example of how people have different attitude towards humor. And also in terms of the resource of the humor itself, I think there is this study I once read that Western people, not Western, I think Canadian people and Singaporean people would prefer different kind of source of humor. Like Western people would would be more open to humor that has, like, um that talk about sex, for example, right?
Mm.
Meanwhile, that is something that is considered as taboo. So I
Right.
think in terms of the materials of the humor, it also sometimes has something to do with politeness and taboo in different cultures. So something might be taboo and might not be okay to create humor, okay, from, and something might be not taboo in the other culture.
So you're saying that some jokes might
Hmm.
be funny in one culture, but it might not be
Might be offensive even in the other
might even
culture.
be offensive. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, also I think different culture would have different language, right?
Mm.
And this linguistic characteristic of the language itself might sometimes cause problems, okay, when it comes
Mm.
to translating one jokes to
True.
another language.
True.
For example, there is this study by Rora. So she studied the syntactic ambiguity in British humor, and actually there is this difficulties, okay, from Spanish speaker to understand the joke, because there is
Mm.
some loss in translation there happening.
Mm.
So yeah, I would say that joke is very much culture specific, and I think even in one book I read that not only cultural specific but it's also gender specific. Okay, I mean human and men can even sometimes perceive jokes differently.
Mm. Mm.
About, yeah, right.
True.
Yeah, it is culturally specific, and I don't know, but probably even sometimes uh individual, like me and you might have different
Mm.
sense of humor, right? So
True. As
it
some
is
people call it.
universal yeah, it is universal in terms that everybody have this sense of humor. But what kind of sense of humor, what could be funny, I think that might differ, okay, one to another.
So then it will become some sort of things that is like food. I mean, if
Mhm.
people can have some sense of or different sense of humor, then it's like taste, right?
Mhm.
Some food might be delicious for
Yeah.
one person, it might not be that
Mhm, mhm.
delicious for another. So,
Yeah. I think that's why we have this kind of terms. We heard this kind of terms of, like, oh, she got like British sense of humor. Oh, she got American sense of humor,
mhm, mhm,
right? I mean, even within these two Western countries, they would have different sense of humor.
mhm. And now we can understand that it's very hard for translators, especially to
I
those who
think,
are
yeah,
translating, you
very
know,
hard,
right,
very
humorous
hard.
text. It's
Yeah,
very hard.
yeah, yeah. I guess, yeah. Um, I think, yeah, I've been watching this series. I mean, ever since I was a child, there's this series called Friends, if you know.
Friends, yeah,
Yeah,
classic
situational
one
comedy.
actually.
Yeah, right. So I've always been crazy with this one actually. And when I see it with translation, actually it's kind of like, like a meh, like
Right,
I
right.
don't get the joke when it's in Indonesian. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not even funny when they put, the translation in Indonesian.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, so it's kind of problematic actually. It
Mm,
requires more research from linguists
yeah.
probably. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. That's
Translation.
why it's worth studying.
Right, right. Okay. So I think it's my last question, Norma, about
Hmm.
this topic. So if after all it's worth studying, so is
Hmm.
there any life lessons that we can learn from humor and from how it's used
Oh,
probably in the media, in movies,
okay.
in text,
Oh,
in politics, perhaps? It's a big question, I know, but
yeah.
could
Hmm.
you at least tell us one
Life
lesson?
lessons.
Yes, please.
Let me think. I think there are so many things, right, that we can, let's say, take advantage of humor, or we can learn from humor. But I think what comes into my mind is, so there is this, I think, old Greek theory that says that tragedy plus time equals comedy.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like everything will eventually become comedy.
Mhm.
So it just need times, right? So something that made you cry 5 years, 10 years ago, might something that you kind of refer back and you kind of think of how silver,
Right.
right? So like that's how I try to think, when something bad happened to me, or something made me sad, or something upset me, I'm just think like, okay, let's wait for another, 2, 3, 5 years, and I'm just gonna laugh about it.
Mhm.
Because, or as people say, yeah, eventually everything is a comedy. So and time heals, right? So I think that's one big lesson from me when it comes to humor. So tragedy plus times equal comedy. And I think also humor is a, as I mentioned before, coping mechanism, or escapism, and it's kind of giving us, as this Greek scholar said, catharsis, right?
Mhm.
It's funny, and actually it gives lightness to even, like important issue, or sensitive issue, and it's enable people to open, discussion and conversation when it's humor, when we are in this, a state, or mental setup, it enable us to have more conversation and discussion, and I think that's good. I mean it's linguistically interesting, and to be able to study or dissect humor, it also make me to enable to create more humor. And that way, there are so many things that I can do, like, I think it would be useful for, like content creators, people on, creative field. I think
Mhm.
they would be thankful if there would more studies about, humor that
Mhm.
they can use.
Yeah. So
So yeah.
I you mentioned that humor is tragedy plus time. So time is some sort of distance, yeah. So we put
Yeah. Yeah.
distance to a tragedy.
Yeah.
And do you
Yeah, I
agree
think
if
we see how. Yeah.
uh, do you agree if do you agree if the word distance here is equally, you know, similar to what we call as wisdom? Because then when we have more wisdom to look at a tragedy, for example,
Yeah.
then we can laugh at it. We can learn.
Yeah.
We can even learn something from it, right?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it takes wisdom
And
to.
yeah, wisdom. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Okay.
Right. Wisdom, and it achieves, okay, by time, right? Through
Mm,
times, I think. And I think that's why people say time is everything. Even
mhm.
tragedy can become comedy at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. So it becomes some sort of catharsis, as you mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it means that we cannot leave out humor out of our culture. Yeah, because it's a very
Yeah.
integral part of our culture.
Indeed.
Okay, so well, Norma, it's a great pleasure talking to you, and I've learned a lot actually
Pleasure
from this
is
talk.
mine.
Well, I think I learned the most here from this talk. Yeah. So thank you very much for coming to this
You're
discussion,
very
and
welcome.
uh, I'd love to meet you again in the future, probably
I hope
with different
so.
topics.
Let's
So
let's pray that the pandemic is over as soon as possible. So maybe we
okay.
can meet.
So Norma is from, for those of you who don't know, Norma is actually from Bantul, yeah, Norma, Bantul
Yeah,
Yogyakarta.
Bali, Bantul Asli.
Bantul asli. Yeah, so we should meet again in the future after the
Yeah.
pandemics. Yeah.